All right, we're live. Duran live chat 25, guys. Awesome. Great job.
And just got the reminder on my phone, so it's working.
All right, yep. Notification should have gone out. Welcome to everyone who is here for the Duran live number 25. Hello, everybody. If you can hear me okay, let me know in the chat. Hello from Dover, UK, from snowy Seattle. All right, snow in Seattle. Peter, is it snowing in Moscow?
Nope, it's melting.
It's melting. All right. Sydney, Australia. Hello from Sydney. Melbourne, Ireland. Penza, Russia. Lagos, Nigeria. West Sussex, California. All right. Northridge, California. Hello to everyone. Welcome to the live chat. Hello to Toronto, Helsinki, Sweden, Netherlands. All right. Great to have everybody here. Egypt, Madison, Wisconsin. Serbia, Florida, Copenhagen, Nigeria, Germany. Hello to everyone. And Peter, the man, the myth, the legend in Moscow, and he has a friend with him as well, Mr. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. How are you, Peter? And who's your friend?
This is Skippy. He's my second dachshund I've ever had. And I have another dachshund named Robbie, and I call this dachshund the gentleman dachshund. So
I think this is his first appearance in on the live chat.
Yeah,
isn't it?
because he's such a gentleman. He stays on his private couch. And he listens away. He just suddenly got curious, and now the two other dogs are molesting me because they want to be touched as well.
All right. Hello, London, Tokyo, Virginia, Valeria from Ukraine. Hello, Valeria, Bristol, UK, Brazil, Wyoming, Victoria, British Columbia. Hello, everybody in Canada. Good to have you here. And I don't think you're in London, somewhere in the UK at an undisclosed location.
An undisclosed location, yes.
Is the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how are you today?
I'm very well indeed. It's actually beautiful. The weather's here is really bright and cold, but there's no snow. We never get much snow in England.
And Alexander, I think people like you in your hoodie. This is your second appearance or your third appearance in the hoodie.
Well, there we go.
He's doing his Zuckerberg imitation.
Very true. All right, great to have everybody here. Welcome everybody to the live chat. Go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, donate to us on PayPal and Patreon. And guys, smash that like button, share the channel with everybody you know. It really helps us out a lot. Alexander, let's go with the first question to you. We're going to answer some questions that people sent before we started the show. And Alexander, this is from Alex. And Alex would like to know, is it dangerous to invest in Russian companies, i.e. the stock market, and to buy stock in Russia? And the question is, I don't think this is an imminent threat, but clearly a lot of people do, or else Russian shares would not be so cheap. So the logic is Russian shares are cheap, so maybe they are high risk.
And they had one of their best weeks in the entire history of the exchange not long ago. Okay.
So they do give a good return, Peter, right?
You have to be patient. The stock market, Russia's stock market still is impacted by what's called a beta effect. So if the Western exchanges are doing very, very well, the Russian stocks tend to reflect it. And so if Western markets go up 5%, the Russian ones can go up to 8% or 9%. But the beta effect works in reverse. If you see a downfall in the Western markets, then you get twice as much pain on the Russian market. So you have to be very clever. You can buy Russian stocks in London, in New York, in Frankfurt, anywhere. You can have a broker do that. Their energy stocks are the favorite ones because there's long term there. We still have like high tech companies that people are interested in because they have like a NASDAQ effect where people can come in really well. It's not for the soft-hearted, okay? I mean, you really have to take a look at it and you have to take it very seriously, okay? But it is a vibrant market and it's doing well. It's Russia's rating, investment rating has been upgraded to stable, positive, which has, of course, helped the stock market and the Russian ruble. So after all these sanctions and all the fake news about Russia, it continues moving along in positive direction.
Alexander, would you recommend to take a look if they are savvy investors like Peter says?
I'm sure they can. I mean, I am not an investment advisor. I will never advise anybody to invest in any company anywhere, apart from the Duran, of course, where people should certainly go on and give donations and do all these things. But I'm not somebody who can actually give that kind of business advice. I don't have that specialty. But what I will say is this: the Russian stock market, if you look at it over the last couple of years, it's actually done pretty well. It's been one of the more stable stock markets, certainly in the emerging economies. And yes, Russian shares are pretty cheap. They're very undervalued. I think the reason they are so undervalued is twofold. Firstly, because Russia's credit rating is far too low, given how strong the underlying economy is and how creditworthy it logically should be. A Russian banker once said to me that the worst sanction the West has ever imposed on Russia is the ratings. Russia's ratings are far too low. Grudgingly, they've been creeping up, and Peter's absolutely right to say that Russian ratings are now all the various big rating companies, Fitch, Moody's, S&P, they're now giving Russia an investment grade rating, but it's still not high enough. And because the Russian sovereign grading isn't high enough, that affects external investment into the Russian stock market.
Right. I'm just going to echo what you were saying there, is that, a lot of funds around the world, they are under obligation not to invest in these markets if they don't reach a certain rating. Okay, they may be very interested in the market or interested in a stock, but their internal governing rules say you can't do it until there's a certain rating. And this is that punishment that Russia experiences. I'm sorry for interrupting, Alex.
Yeah, which goes back, we should add, long before the 2014 Ukrainian/Crimean crisis. I mean, this has been a long-running issue, and it's one that makes the Russians very, very angry. Now, the second thing is, of course, we can't avoid discussing sanctions, because the sanctions have always been there in the background, and I think they have had some deterrent effect on Western investors. But I'm going to make one observation about the sanctions, which is that, of course, 2018 was supposed to be the year when, extra sanctions on Russia were going to be rolled out. And sure enough, we got sanctions in April against Rusal, which is one of Russia's major companies, which is a big aluminium company. And there was certain other sanctions that were rolled out in August, which were supposedly connected to the Skripal affair. However, so far, there's been no follow-up. What has instead happened is that the Rusal sanctions had to be cancelled because the backwash in the financial and metals markets was so bad internationally. The Treasury, the US Treasury, has issued reports saying that, in fact, it might start negatively affecting the world and US economies if we start imposing further sanctions on Russia, because Russia is so big. And the second bunch of sanctions that were threatened in August, following the first Skripal sanctions, so far haven't materialized. So it could be that we are now past peak sanctions. Russian economy did well last year. It grew more than expected. Inflation is likely to fall. One would think overall that the country is a good credit risk. If the country is a good credit risk, logically, the companies also should be. As I said, the various credit rating agencies are starting to reflect that, though nowhere near enough. But I come back to what I said at the beginning. Don't ask me for advice on investing in any individual Russian company. I simply don't have that level of expertise.
All right, we have a lot of questions that people sent in before the show. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we'll try to run through these very quickly. We have a lot of ground to cover, guys. Let's see, we have from Gobberwala, good to have you here again. I think your discussion yesterday on Maduro prematurely threw him under the bus. Maybe. What do you think about that, Alexander? And then I want Peter's take. We discussed, just to preface my question, we discussed the immense amount of pressure that Maduro is under. And of course, we do recognize that it is very difficult to get a read as to what is really happening in Venezuela. But the pressure is immense. And as the sanctions tighten, as Alexander noted, the sanctions, as they tighten, things are going to start to get harder for him over time. Alexander, and then I want to hear Peter's take on Maduro's
I mean,
position.
The questioner asks a valid question. And if you go back to our video, we were a bit careful. I mean, we did say that there is a high degree of uncertainty at the moment. And up to this moment, up to now, this Guaido alternative that has been sponsored by the United States and other external powers doesn't seem to be acquiring much momentum. There weren't big protests over the weekend. The country seems to be overall quiet. The government continues to function. The military continues to obey the commander-in-chief, which it recognizes, who is President Maduro. The big question is this: the thing that what caused Alex and myself to be cautious is that the really heavy sanctions the United States has now imposed haven't really bitten in yet. And what is going to be a problem for Venezuela is going to be the oil sanctions, because the oil that Venezuela produces is very heavy. Refineries to make it useful really only exist in the United States. Russia and China don't apparently have the kind of refineries that are needed to convert Venezuelan oil into petroleum products. And more to the problem, neither does Venezuela itself. So that is where the problem, that's where our concern is, that with time, there will be increasing economic hardship in Venezuela. There will be increasing pressure on various elements of the Venezuelan government, on the military leaders, on the diplomatic corps to defect. And one has to say, when one looks at the lopsided power dynamic in this, the United States, with all its allies on the one hand, President Maduro on the other, leading a country that is very vulnerable, it's difficult to be optimistic. We would hope, for all kinds of reasons, that he is able to resist all of this, because in spite of the many criticisms that can be made of Maduro, in fact, I mean, you know, he's been a disastrous president economically, and I think one has to concede that. Regime change is wrong, and this is an exercise in regime change. But because it is wrong, I'm sorry to say, we can't say at the moment it won't succeed. I mean, the Venezuelans are to a great extent alone, and the pressure on them is immensely strong.
Peter, what's your take on Maduro's viability?
Only to add what's been said very well. You know, we all look at, you know, where the military is going to position itself. Right now, it's positioned behind the legal government. And then how much pain can the Venezuelan people take? And I think there's one thing that's misunderstood, and I am not here to cheerlead for Hugo Chavez, okay? I'm neither for or against him, all right? But it has to be said that millions and millions of people were brought into the political process and did experience a degree of prosperity. And that's meaning they came from almost nothing, being ignored. And, you know, one of the most unpleasant things that no one wants to talk about in Western media, that politics in Venezuela are very, very race-driven, okay? Very race-driven. I mean, if you look at this Guaido guy, they're standing out in front of the National Assembly. Look at their faces, okay? They didn't vote for Chavez, okay? Because Chavez is part indigenous. And that's one of the things I didn't like about him, all right? This is very racist on the part of the right-wing opposition. They have very European-looking faces, all right? And this upstart here, even on my own program, Crosstalk, Vanessa Newman said, look at him with his brown face, as if, here, we got our token, all right? He's not catching on with the population. They know he's a poser. Yeah. And as badly, and I agree with Alexander Mercouris, I think the economy under the current president has not been run very well. And this is what happens when you have such vast oil wealth. You have a lot of largesse, and and it's open it opens the economy up to into corruption, and I think that's all there. I mean, we're not saying anything taboo, all right? So, will the people follow this? That's the real wild card here. Number 3, I gotta think, and this is a hunch on my part here, I think Trump is going along with it as long as he doesn't have to have a military adventure. I think that's basically what he said to Bolton and even Abrams, okay? Do all the shenanigans you want, but I'm not sending troops there. I promised I wouldn't do it, and I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to have this held against me in 2020. And I think that Trump probably drew a red line there. Do whatever you want to disrupt. Don't make sure the oil markets don't go spiraling down. We'll try to get a deal with the Saudis if we need it, but don't go past my red line. This is my gut feeling right now, all right? Because Trump is succeeding, depending on who you want to listen to, troop reductions in the Middle East. Now the Pentagon has a timetable, unless there's an incident, which of course we're all watching. He's getting his way slowly but surely. His optics and his messaging isn't working because his team isn't working with him with optics and messaging. But it's beginning, I sense it's beginning to happen. Plans are being made here. Venezuela would upturn that cart, and he doesn't want somebody like Tulsi Gabbard to be able to steal that away from him about foreign interventions, because we still know that there's a part of the Trump base that watches this issue. These are congressional districts that have a high number of active military and retired military, and they do vote, and they are not pro-war. So we have to keep an eye on the internal dynamics, because this Guaido guy has not caught fire, no matter how you want to paint him in the Western media. And the very fact that he said a few days ago that he might allow or request a foreign intervention, he even said that's controversial. That's an understatement from this upstart here. Nobody wants that. No one. And they've seen the American record in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. They don't want that to come to them. And it's going to be on Trump's head. Does Trump really want to go into an election cycle in starting a new foreign adventure? I don't think so. So, Christoforou, the first video we made on this topic, what did we call it? Shock and awe. We're still in the shock and awe phase of this here. It can go either way, but the longer it takes for this to succeed, the better chances it won't. That's my prediction.
There you go. Thank you, Valley S, for the $20 super chat. Thank you very much. Penguins fan, thank you for your super chat as well. And all right, Penguins fan sent another super chat. Peter, this is for you. The question is, are you ready, Peter? Anything on Justin Trudeau?
I'm sorry to disappoint. I couldn't find really, the good, bad, and the ugly of Justin Trudeau. He does remain in my thoughts. I'm still, what was it? Just, his whole gambit in this Chinese CEO, and how impotent Justin Trudeau is, because he doesn't run his foreign policy now. Christina Freeland, what's her last name?
Friedland, I think.
Friedland, yeah. She's running it here. I mean, this whole, if we could just switch back to Venezuela real quick here, at the expense of Justin Trudeau, she's the one that's been engineering it, this Lima group. It was just designed specifically for her to meddle in the Western Hemisphere. So the Canadians, being good liberals that they are under Justin Trudeau, they're the ones that are pushing regime change here. And a lot of people are beginning to pick up on that. I mean, who the hell is this woman here? She's staunchly anti-Russian. I mean, she's probably the most staunchly Russophobic public figure in the Western world that has actual power. I don't know how much power the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Canada has, but apparently she's trying to demonstrate it. So within his own government, it seems to me, has some kind of rogue player on his team here. I mean, the guy doesn't inspire confidence, does he?
No,
Can I
yeah,
just
Alexander.
add one very quick comment about Justin Trudeau and Venezuela? Pierre Trudeau, who I think was his father,
Yep.
would be spinning in his grave at this moment.
Sure would be.
The one thing that Pierre Trudeau, I am absolutely sure of, is that he would have been implacably opposed and outspokenly opposed to this regime change operation in Venezuela. He was not in favor of those sort of things at all. And I think he must be absolutely horrified. Horrified if he is
No, because
where he is, up there, no doubt, somewhere, looking down on the situation now and seeing what his son and the government that his son is leading is doing.
Canada traditionally has portrayed itself to the world as a fair arbiter, as a fair broker. I mean, what was the country doing probably one of the most traumatic things, probably since Pearl Harbor, the Iranian hostage crisis? What country was the one that helped the Americans escape outside of that outlandishly stupid Hollywood film? Okay, it was the Canadian diplomatic representation in Tehran that turned the trick for the Americans to escape. And that is something Canada should be very, very proud of, okay? And so Canada is trashing one of its great traditions on the world stage. It just bows to power in every single way. It gives away its sovereignty and it tarnishes its reputation on the global stage. Shame on the Canadian government. And I hope the Canadian people finally get rid of these fools. What have you done?
Well put. Rainy Steps, thank you for your super chat as well. Great show as always. Thank you, Rainy Steps. Afterglow super chat for Alexander. Has Donald Tusk's spiteful outburst done the EU more harm than good?
It certainly has in Britain. I mean, I think there's been a very negative reaction to these comments in Britain. I think we discussed it in a program, Alex and I, recently. And I mean, I was listening to some people who are Remainers today in Britain, and they were also saying to me that they thought that these comments of Donald Tusk were absolutely awful. I don't think they've done any good for the EU anywhere, actually. I don't think they've done it good in any part of Europe. Certainly not in places like Italy or France, where people see what kind of a person Donald Tusk is, unelected, an official in Brussels, intervening in this way, in this abusive way, against the internal democratic politics of what is still a member state. I'm going to make another prediction, another guess, by the way, which is I suspect that in Donald Tusk's own Poland, these comments have not gone down well. And I would not be surprised if when Donald Tusk made these comments, he had half an eye on the situation in Poland also, where the Kaczynski government also has big issues with the EU and is very, very opposed to Donald Tusk, and in fact gained power by winning the election against Donald Tusk's party. So I think these are extremely unwise, thoughtless, bad comments, and I think they've done a lot of damage in all sorts of places.
You guys, it's pronounced Tusk, okay? And he's a Kashub. He's not Polish.
Wow.
There's a Kashubian minority in the north of the country on the Baltic coast, and Donald Tusk is a perfect representation of elite capture. Okay, so the Brussels bureaucracy, the ongoing criminal cabal, they have captured him. Okay, and so Tusk will speak more for Brussels than he will ever speak for Poland. Which in Poland, from what I understand, he's not particularly popular at all. He's an opportunist, and he's just feeding at the EU trough. Okay, which he'll probably be greatly rewarded. He's there to say these silly things. Okay, and at the end of the day, nobody cares what he says or thinks.
Well, can I just qualify that, Peter? I think in Britain, people did care. I think this came at a full moment.
No, it's because they take offense to it, but it's not because Donald Tusk said it. It's because his position, okay? Yes. Not because of him.
Yes.
That may be wrong.
I would agree with that. I mean, it's not about him. It's about he represents, he embodies the people here, what the whole Brussels, the EU Commission, and the whole EU combine, if you like, is all about.
All right, that leads me to this next question from JR. Alexander and Peter, you say you agree with each other on many questions. On what, if any, points do you mutually disagree?
Well, I think I've said this before on one of our live chats. I think on social questions, certainly, Peter is more conservative than I am. I am more, I won't say quite socially liberal, but maybe so. I mean, I have a sort of more general acceptance of, shall we say, feminism, or at least a more, not acceptance, a more active support for feminism, if I can use that. So on social questions, I think, as I said, there is a nuanced difference. Not a great one, but it is there. On international affairs, I think we pretty much agree on most things. I suspect on economics we do, but you know, those are the kind of things we. And I'm sure there's details. Peter, you're laughing. You're
Wrong. Wrong.
Wrong.
Sad.
Okay.
No. I think no.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the Duran. What do we do every single week? We talk about, for the most part, geopolitics. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if we could do maybe separate chats on different topics like identity politics, postmodernism, post-Marxism, feminism, and then I think it would be a lot more differences. Okay, because believe it or not, I'm far more conservative than Alexander Mercouris, but because of the questions that we are asked, it's not made apparent, okay? And obviously, Alexander Mercouris is one of my closest life friends, and I'm not looking for a fight with the guy, okay, at all right?
No,
so, yeah, right. So, no, I mean, I was through most of my life extremely liberal, okay, and I've just living outside of the neoliberal paradigm. I've been able to, you know, pull the blind back and get back to more core values, and rejecting a lot of the propaganda that I was taught as I was being brought up. So, I mean, I have very strong feelings about abortion, and I'm sure Alexander Mercouris and I probably disagree on that. Maybe the death penalty as well. This whole trans nonsense, we probably would disagree to some extent. So if you want to ask us questions like that, I'm more than happy to answer them, but we just very rarely get those questions, okay? We get, you know, Syria, Venezuela, Russia, EU, Merkel, Macron, okay? I mean, I think I tend to answer all my questions one way or another about how dreadful neoliberalism is for Western civilization, okay? I mean, that's my modus operandi, okay? And it includes a foreign policy. But if you ask us a specific question, we're going to give you a specific answer.
All right. And Liam Hicks says 40,000 more people in Mexico are on strike with the Matamoros strikers. We did a video on this, Alexander. We covered
Thank God. Thank God.
Yes, and we did talk about this, but it's good to know. It's actually good information that strikes are continuing. We were unaware of that.
We weren't sure because there's been such a complete media blackout. And the last I saw, it was 25,000, and it looks as if it's growing. And that is an important fact, and one which ought to be reported and isn't being.
All right, from Law is Truth. Alexander, any takes on Pompeo's Soros stand in Nigeria elections? And Alexander, I want to preface this by saying, yes, Nigeria will have elections. Nigeria does have a lot of oil. And there's a lot of people in the chat, Alexander, that are asking about the newly discovered oil in South Africa and what that means for the country. So can you kind of tie all these themes together for us, Alexander?
Well, I mean, Nigeria is having elections, and Nigeria is a very, very important country. It's what, 160 million? I think we were talking about this earlier. 160 million. It has huge resources, and it is a major oil producer. It has also got systemic corruption problems on a scale that is simply beyond imagination. And of course, it has a major problem with terrorism, with Islamist terrorism in the northern Muslim areas. Boko Haram, which is previously associated in some ways with ISIS, is a major and violent force within Nigeria. So it's an important country, a very important country. It is generally a country with good relations with the United States. And if you look at the two candidates, Buhari and I think his name is Atullah, I can't remember his name exactly, but his opponent. I don't think personally there's going to be any great change in Nigerian foreign policy. Nigeria isn't very involved in foreign policy issues around the world. It is to some extent in Africa. So I don't think the United States is interested in Nigeria to any great extent in terms of its foreign policy orientation. It does have some interest in the terrorism that's ongoing there. It has a lot of interest in the fact that seems to be, or rather Donald Trump has great interest in the fact that Boko Haram seems to be targeting Christian communities in Nigeria, which obviously has big traction in the United States and for him. And of course, the United States is always concerned about the stability, as it sees it, of the oil market and wants the price of oil to be always lower rather than higher. So the United States is watching the elections in Nigeria closely. I don't think it is at the moment especially concerned about the way they're going. And I think they will work perfectly satisfactorily with whichever leader these elections produce.
And what about oil in South Africa?
Oh, yes.
Let me finish with Nigeria. I mean, there's a lot, American and European energy concerns in the Nigerian market, and as long as that status quo stays the same, I don't think they really care one way or another. Okay, really? Okay.
Sorry, I forgot about South Africa. Well, South Africa, the important thing to remember about South Africa is that it is a member of the BRICS. So it is a member of this informal grouping, in fact, not so informal grouping, which brings together China, Russia, Brazil, India, and of course South Africa. South Africa is the S in the BRICS. Now, it's looking increasingly likely that Brazil will be less involved in the BRICS under the new government of Bolsonaro, which is very pro-US. But South Africa is different. Ramaphosa, who is the new president of South Africa, seems to have good relations with the Chinese and the Russians. I think that if oil arrives in South Africa with all the many, many problems that it has, and that strengthens that particular leg of the BRICS, that will be a concern for the US, but not, I think, in the end, a major concern, because South Africa is not one of the major powers in the world. It's a power in Africa, but not in the world. And it has always managed to maintain fairly good relations with the United States whilst being a member of the BRICS. The last thing I would say is that, of course, South Africa also has huge issues of corruption and governance, even though those are not on anything like the scale of what we see in Nigeria, where corruption is practically the organizing force in politics and to some extent in society.
I should only hope for the South Africans, considering all of their problems, is that I suggest very, very seriously, please take a look at the Norwegian model, where all resource of revenues generated through oil and gas were set aside, and so they wouldn't be injected into the economy. You'll get Dutch disease, and then it'll just compound. I mean, they'll be richer, but there'll be more income disparities. There'll be increased corruption. There'll be all kinds of nasty things. Oil is a curse if you don't know how to deal with it. So this actually, if played the wrong way, will make South Africa's problems even worse.
Well put. All right, guys, remember to share the channel with everybody. Smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Click on the notifications bell. Get the word out about the Duran channel. We appreciate all your help. Let's get to some super chats. Peter, this one's for you from Black Jack Pinocchio. Any predictions on the Trump-Kim summit 2.0 in Vietnam?
Yep, Trump has to get something tangible, at least something he believes is tangible, because unfortunately the summit, like it was in Singapore, unfortunately in the minds of the American political class, the deep state, and the swamp known as the media, it has nothing to do with peace on the Korean Peninsula. It's how bad Donald Trump can be made to be looked. Okay, I mean, this is it for me. It's just really sad. I follow every day the events going on in the Korean Peninsula. It is so heartening. It is amazing. Such a the last real Cold War conflict, the most defended border in the world, bad blood for generations, at least on the highest levels of government in both countries. And over the last year or so, the gestures, signaling about how they can move forward together as two countries, as one nation. It really makes your eyes swell if you know the history of the conflict. And Donald Trump better add to it, not subtract from it. You know, he should leave John Bolton at home. He should leave Pompeo at home, and let's see how we can move forward. Now, having said all that, you know, considering all the hubristic, you know, bluster, you know, I mean, the U.S. always says, you know, surrender and then we'll negotiate. Which, you know, the Koreans are going to say, we saw that movie. It ends badly for us. So Trump has to, and he's owned this. This is his right now, because all of his advisors, the foreign policy elite and the media are against him on this initiative. Now he has to show he can be the art of the deal. So this is very, very important, because it's how he's going to spin it. Now, Alexander Mercouris and I have talked multiple times. Trump doesn't come off well after these, the presser after the summit. In Helsinki, he came off very poorly. I thought in Singapore, he came out hollow, essentially not really knowing the details. So he better pull it off this time, because it's a worthy cause. For goodness sake, you guys. I don't care if it's good for Trump, bad for Trump. It's good for the Korean people of both countries here. I'm cautiously optimistic something can be brought about. But if he's going to bring his advisors and say they have to disarm and then we can talk, Trump's got to say, we're going to do it my way, back off. All right. So this is going to be very critical. It's going to be on my birthday, by the way, so I'll be watching.
All right. Alexander, we have a super chat from Penguin. Everybody now knows your birthday, Peter, so you can give your address where people can send gifts. All right, Alexander, from Penguin's Fan, an update on Idlib, Syria.
Yes, well, I mean, the situation is still much as we've discussed it on previous programs. I mean, Al-Qaeda, through its latest iteration, is now firmly in control of Idlib. The Syrian army is apparently building up its forces around Idlib, and there have been negotiations underway between the Russians and the Turks, which I think will eventually lead to a Syrian military offensive in Idlib. I have no doubt about it. But I think what the Russians want to do, and I think what all of the various countries, including Turkey and of course Syria, want, is their first priority at the moment is to get the United States out of Syria. This is what Donald Trump has promised will happen. This is what the Pentagon now says will happen. There is supposed to be a timetable to make that happen. I think they would rather wait until they have seen that actually happen, that the United States leaves Syria before starting an operation in Idlib, because I don't think they want the United States, or to be more precise, people in the Pentagon and elsewhere, using a Syrian army operation in Idlib as an excuse to keep US troops on the ground in Syria. So I think if we're seeing a delay, I think that is the entire reason for it. Putin and Erdogan are now in regular talks. There was a meeting between them on the 23rd of January. There's now going to be a three-party summit soon, very soon, in Sochi, with the Turks, the Russians, and the Iranians there. And I'm sure that there's lots of discussions going on about what to do with Idlib. And I think that, of course, they're going to have to address this problem, which we've discussed on the programs many times, which is when the Syrian army moves into Idlib and Al-Qaeda is thrown out of Idlib, where do those Al-Qaeda fighters go? The Turks don't want them for obvious reasons. And so where are they going to go? What is going to happen to these people, dangerous as they are? But I mean, I'm sure there are ongoing discussions and negotiations about this. I am sure Idlib will be under Syrian government control certainly some point this year. I think, as I said, they will wait until the United States definitely has pulled out.
Well, that's what I think the Sochi confab is going to be all about. Putin's going to say to Erdogan, "So what are you going to do? You said many times. Now push comes to shove. The Americans look like they're pulling out. Now, you know, let's say what's real here. You back these folks. Now, what are you going to do to get rid of them? Okay, we're listening. Everybody is listening because Idlib will fall under control of the Syrian government, one way or another. No, it's up to you to solve this problem. And I don't think Erdogan would be going to Sochi unless he had some idea, because my gut feeling tells me is that, you know, Russia has strategic patience like nobody else, okay? But even they have their limits. They're going to say, look, you made these promises a while back, and things are in flux right now. And the longer you stay there, the more enemies you make in the region. I mean, you played the Khashoggi affair to your delight, okay? But, you know, the perception of that brutality of the Saudi regime is one thing, but the geopolitical chessboard is another thing. And Erdogan is not endearing himself to anyone in the region, a region where Erdogan wants to have a preponderance of power. So he's got himself really between a rock and a hard place. He's got to show he's at the bazaar, which he's best at, and to solve multiple problems simultaneously. So Putin's going to say, hey, let's go out to the pool. Let's have a couple of drinks. I want to hear your plan, okay?
All right, Peter, Alexander, I want to tack on a couple more questions from Afro Priapus on Syria, and I'll shoot them out to you guys if you guys can answer them quickly. They're related to Syria. So here we go. Peter, what is the future of the Free Syrian Army? What do you believe?
Zero.
Zero. All right.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. Alexander, what is the probability of Assad accepting Kurdish autonomous region in Syria with a deal with the Kurds?
No, he's not going to accept an autonomous region in Syria. He's going to accept a measure of decentralization in northern Syria, which will give the Kurds there some cultural rights which they have not previously had. But I think for Assad, the idea of an autonomous region with the Kurds essentially running their own affairs is unacceptable, and I think it is for the Turks also. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think there will be some kind of deal which will give the Kurds some local powers, and I think there will also be some attempts by the Russians to try and leverage some influence of the Kurds in the central government in Damascus. But we should not be looking at any continuation of any kind of autonomous statelet of the kind that we have seen.
And Peter, finally, how plausible
I want to tack on something there, because Alexander Mercouris is right. I think we're going to have to really finesse semantics here. Autonomy, self-rule. I think, you know, every single party is going to be able to read into what that means and find a way where they can all kind of, you know, live with it here. But, you know, we do have the Lebanese model where you have the president is from one sect, the head of the parliament is from another, the prime minister is. I think that, you know, Lebanon shows a future here, you know, because we can have a Sunni, an Alawite, a Kurd, and it works for Lebanon here. And I think considering everything that Syria has gone through, the Kurds and the Syrian government have not really had any serious spats during all this long conflict here. So there is a level of trust here. Now, of course, the neighborhood, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, they're going to be watching intensely here because it's a, you know, it's across the region issue. I don't want to say problem because, you know, the Kurds are Kurds, okay? But it affects all of these countries. So I think really what we need to do is we need good statecraft here, and we have to be able to make everyone feel comfortable with the language and what it actually means, because having some kind of enriched self-rule, see, even I'm playing with the words right now, where the Kurds can find it satisfactory. and the Turks as well. All right, because we don't need a Syrian-Turkish war. Okay, it's a NATO country, for goodness sake. All right, so I think after what gives me hope is that after everything we've seen in Syria over these years, a war that never should have happened, is that a lot of people say we've been there, we don't want to go back there. Let's wipe the slate clean and let's get some reconciliation, and let's move this forward, and let's keep these outsiders out. All right. And Russia is playing a very, very important role at reconciliation, village by village. There's a lot of Chechens there working as a conduit. They are Muslim. They understand these people. They interact with these people. They're not seen as occupiers. Certainly, people are not going to stay for a very long time. So, these are assets the Russians can have. They have at their disposal. A deal will be made with the Kurds. Okay, simple as that. The language and the semantics. That's the tough nut to crack.
And finally, Peter, the last question on Syria. How plausible is Erdogan's plan of resettling 5 to 6 million Syrian refugees from Turkey to Syria? Even if that number is not correct, how plausible is it for Erdogan to get those refugees back?
I think number one, the thing we have to find out most is how many people do want to come back and what kind of conditions will be there. I mean, if the U.S. is still occupying it, Turkey is still funding and backing what is really terrorist groups. I don't, do you want to go home to that? And Erdogan plays this refugee card all the time with everybody. Okay. My understanding is because Syria is a very sophisticated society, educated society, these people would like to go back to a sense of normality, a normal existence, but they're going to be looking at the terms and conditions of that to be able to come home. And I think that, Erdogan is, it's the Europeans paying for it. Erdogan and his people are hosting, okay? The Europeans don't want to pay for this indefinitely. And Erdogan could show goodwill because he doesn't need a fifth column in his own country. That's what his whole obsession with the Kurds are. All right. So, help rebuild that. And hopefully the European Union will grow a spine. I know that's a tough call right there, but to really be forceful in helping the Syrian government to rebuild. The Chinese will, definitely Russia would throw in technical expertise, but of course they'll be sanctioned by the United States because they've passed legislation that no one can help the Syrians rebuild. I mean, what a spiteful country the U.S. is when it comes. It helps turn a country upside down, inside out, and backwards. Hundreds of thousands of people are dead, and then they do everything in their power to obstruct ceasefire after ceasefire. And then once the local players on the ground with invited help, like Russia and Duran and Hezbollah, finally get a semblance of peace, the U.S. spites the whole thing by saying, "We're going to sanction you if you rebuild." It just blows my mind.
All right, Rainy Steps, thank you for your super chat. I like Peter's point of view. So do I, and so do a lot of other viewers here. Thank you for that super chat. Alexander, a question from Roseanne. 2 questions. Can Brexit lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom? And what flaws do you see in the EU? Monetary union, fiscal constraints, sovereignty nations. What flaws do you see that could break up the EU as well?
Right.
Are we going to be here? Are we going to be here for the next 12 hours?
This is going to be a 12-hour show. Alexander, go.
Let's deal with the UK. I mean, it is possible, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's possible that the UK could break up. I mean, Scotland voted to remain in the EU. England voted to leave. If Britain leaves the EU, there may be some people in Scotland who are unhappy about that. There's also a very complicated situation in Northern Ireland, with a large part of the population of Northern Ireland always unhappy about the fact that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. And of course, Northern Ireland also voted to stay in the EU. Having said that, I think it is important to stress that these problems of Scotland and Northern Ireland long preceded Brexit. We had a referendum in Scotland a few years ago where Scotland did vote to stay within the United Kingdom, but the majority was not enormous, and there did seem to be moments when it looked as if it might be very close, and that happened when the question of Britain leaving the EU did not appear to exist. It was not an issue in the referendum, in the Scottish referendum at all. So we mustn't, I think, fall into the trap of blaming any secession by Scotland or conceivably by Northern Ireland on Brexit, because we can't be sure it wouldn't have happened anyway. There is a Scottish Nationalist Party government in power in Scotland right now, and it has been in power there for a long time, and it has been committed to independence for a long time. Now, as for the EU, well, I mean, again, there are so many problems. I think there are underlying those problems. There's one overriding one, which is that some people in the EU, not just within the EU bureaucracy in Brussels, but also in certain governments, France, Macron being one, some people in the German government also have had this conception of the EU becoming, by stealth, because it's never really been voted to be that by the people of Europe, some kind of supranational political quasi-state entity in which power flows downwards. So decisions are made in Brussels by people who are not necessarily elected. We were talking about Mr. Donald Tusk, as Peter tells us his name should be pronounced before, and we've heard the things he says about people in Britain, and he's unelected. It's been flowing downwards, and it is becoming increasingly unpopular. And in pursuit of that project, these people have been forcing more and more countries into economic and cultural and indeed political straitjackets that they are not happy with. So we've seen the euro, the imposition of the euro as the single currency, which is increasingly being used to administer economic policies in countries like Greece and Italy and Spain, very disadvantageously to the economies of these countries. We've seen the EU having a very clear lifestyle and culture policy, which wants to promote a certain conception of how lifestyle should be lived, which is not popular in many places in Eastern Europe, like in Poland, for example, which is a Christian country. We've seen also increasing foreign policy initiatives, which many people are not happy with in Europe, like imposition of sanctions on Russia. We've seen all of these things taken together, and in order to affect these policies, we've also seen growing interference by the EU in the internal political affairs of EU states. So we saw in Greece some years ago how the EU engineered the removal of the George Papadopoulos government, how it engineered the removal of Silvio Berlusconi when he was Prime Minister of Italy. We've seen suffocating of banking unions and all of these things. So
Ukraine,
of course, too. So it has become an increasingly aggressive ideological project, which is being imposed through various instruments on the people of Europe, and that is, of course, creating more and more problems in Europe, and in a continent which has historically prided itself on its diversity, where states have always been proud of their nationhood and of their sovereignty, and where there has been a hard-fought battle to achieve social democratic rights in some places and democratic rights in many places. All of this is becoming increasingly resented and increasingly opposed. And as Peter said, we can go on talking about this not just for 12 hours, but for 12 weeks and probably 12 months and not have exhausted this question.
Yeah, the only thing I would add too is that Brussels is not fighting for its own sovereignty.
No.
Vis-a-vis the United States. Look at Germany's energy policy in the Nord Stream 2.
Yeah.
I mean, inordinate amount of pressure being put on the German government. Is Brussels backing the pillar of the EU on this? No, I mean, Macron, again, the coward of Europe, he waffled on it. Okay, who knows what Washington is, what kind of pressure he's being put under by Washington. I mean, not only does the European Union really not have an understanding of the people that they govern over, they allow their foreign policy and security interests to be dictated by an outside power, and that outside power isn't Russia; it's the United States.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat from Brody. What is the possibility of Tulsi Gabbard winning the U.S. presidency in 2020?
I don't even think she'll make it into the primaries. So see, this is what this cross-media attack on her has been over the last week. It's to take her down even before the first debate. They don't want to see her on that stage, okay? And they're going to do everything in their power to smear her. I suggest everyone take a look at Glenn Greenwald's stuff over at The Intercept. Brilliant writing, great analysis. They don't want her in the public eye. They're going to slur and smear her. They're going to keep doing it until no one wants to publicly back her, okay? Oh, she's just a Putin puppet. She's an Assad puppet. That's the message over and over again. I disagree with her on some points. I think she's very smart. I think she's very attractive in every way. And I think she should be able to stand her ground and give her peace, okay? Let her say something, all right? There's a lot of politicians I disagree with. I say give them a platform and let them speak and let the people decide. No, the media and the political establishment across the board, they want to smother her before the first debate. Mark my words.
All right, Alexander, a super chat from E-Ray. Do you think the sanctions have actually helped Russia's agriculture and moved the Russian government to support its agriculture?
There's no question about this.
No question.
I think the sanctions were manna from heaven for Russia's agricultural economy. I mean, what had happened in Russia was that, of course, Russia has enormous potential, colossal potential as an agricultural producer, but it was unable to fulfill that potential because after the Soviet collapse, Russian agriculture was in desperate straits, and instead of investing to develop it, it was cheaper to buy food from Europe and from other places. So the Russian government, which was very, very keen to support agriculture and to support it, it slapped on these counter sanctions, which basically stopped food imports from countries that had themselves imposed sanctions on Russia. And that has provided a massive protectionist boost to the Russian agricultural economy, which is booming. I mean, it has been an extraordinary transformation in the last few years, and agriculture is now becoming a major exporter for Russia. It is contributing very significantly now to the country's balance of payments.
Yes, they've overcome what the Bolsheviks did to agriculture, which was to completely destroy it. So this is a resurrection. 100 years later, the resurrection of the Russian agricultural sector. Russia used to be called the breadbasket of Europe, and now it's becoming the breadbasket to the world. And there are no GMOs. Russia has outlawed it. So it makes Russian food and grain even more attractive here. It is the biggest unsung story of Russia's economic reforms since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And you know what? If you have deep pockets, you can invest here legally, no problem, get your partners. And once it starts turning a profit, that profit is one direction. It just keeps getting bigger. Jim Rogers, one of the great financiers of the world, what sector is he in? He's in agriculture. And I have the good fortune to meet him at least once a year when he comes through.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat from Afterglow. Trump, a man of the people or a deep state tool? Which one?
Well,
or neither?
Future historians, well, that's a perfectly phrased question, because there's empirical evidence for both. Okay, it's really interesting. I think the State of the Union address was actually quite good. It was very tempered. I think Trump made some very good points. He didn't go into Twitter mode, thank God. But I think he made a proclamation during the State of the Union address. He told us right to our faces, if you want to pay attention, and not this, Nancy Pelosi stuff. That was just disgusting. My God, there's no dignity left in that house. He's made it very clear what he's going to run on: anti-socialism and anti-late-term abortion. He made it clear, both, okay? And he, on his side of the aisle, I mean, cheering and standing ovation. And, you know, the Stepford wives there didn't do anything, okay? And that was shown on national television. Late-term abortion is like 97% of the population is against that. He's got a winner with that one. And of course, given the tradition of anti-socialism in American political culture, and to our viewers outside of the United States, socialism has a very different meaning for Americans. And actually, most Americans don't know what socialism is, okay? So it's very different from Europe. It's very different everywhere in the world, okay? It has a very specific, visceral meaning for American political culture. And Trump is going to squeeze it for all it's worth. And it is going to help him. It definitely is going to help him. The whole thing gets down to this. Avoid a military intervention of his own making. If he avoids that, and the country, the global economy hasn't gone into recession, he's got a fighting chance in 2020.
All right, Alexander, we have a question from Asma. What do you think will happen now that France has recalled its ambassador from Italy? And why did Di Maio meet the Yellow Vest leaders in the first place? Was it a sign that Italy started to rebel and no more sitting in the shadows?
But by remarkable coincidence, we've actually done a video about this, Alex and I, which we discussed some of these questions. I think that Di Maio and the Five Star Movement, which is the sort of left-wing half of the Italian coalition government, were becoming a bit concerned about the mileage that Salvini and the Northern League was making. And I think that this was their way of balancing that out, because they've come to realize, and I think they also sincerely believe, that anti-EU and anti-Macron policies are not only right for Italy, but play well in Italy with Italian voters. And I think this is why they did it. I think that there is, a genuine connection, a feeling of connection, sympathy for the Yellow Vests on the part of some people in Italy, because of course we must remember that the Five Star Movement, a little like the Yellow Vests, also began in many ways as a kind of insurgent grassroots movement. But as I said, I think that there are also political calculations at play here. I think Italy is going to start gradually evolving into a increasingly anti-EU establishment force. I think that is exactly where the present Italian government is leading it towards. And I think we can see how the Italians are also increasingly trying to create a coalition of countries within the EU, the Visegrad group, Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, all of those, and Italy's trying to take a lead with them as it gradually tries to oppose these integrationist policies by the EU that we spoke about a bit earlier. I think, why did Macron react in that way? I think because Macron is a vain fool. I think that responding in that way was the worst thing he possibly could have done. Here is a French president who is happy to intervene and meddle in the internal politics of all sorts of other countries, including Britain, by the way, where he's taken a very strong anti-Brexit line and has shown great sympathy for the anti-Brexit positions taken by certain British politicians. And yet, when the Italians meet the Yellow Vests, how does he react? He ridiculously overreacts by recalling his ambassador. I think what it shows yet again is how out of touch with politics Macron has become, and how lacking in good judgment and in good handling of these kind of issues Macron shows. I would add that he's also recently picked a very foolish fight with the Germans over Nord Stream 2, over which he's been forced to back down. And I can't help but think that at some level he's trying to assert himself because he's aware of the pressures against him in France also. But it was a mistake. It was a foolish thing to do. And I think it's simply another example of why Macron is, frankly, a very poor president of France.
Peter, we can't hear you, Peter. Your mic. No, we can't hear you.
Right
Audio problems. Now we got you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say if Macron wants to give you advice, just do the opposite. Okay, you'll be better off for it.
There you go. And Peter, Pegwoods fan, has a super chat. When will the sanctions on Russia be lifted, and who is suffering from sanctions more, Russia or the West?
The West, particularly European economies. It's very disingenuous of the United States when it comes to economic sanctions against Russia, because the United States has virtually no trade with Russia. So when they call for sanctions, they're asking everyone else to pony up. All right. The sanctions that the U.S. has passed against Russia may last forever.
And the European sanctions?
In the American case, Congress has to undo them. Okay, the Europeans have a rolling 6-month voting on it, and as Alexander Mercouris and I have pointed out on a number of occasions, it went from consensus to it went from unity to consensus, and so we could see the sanctions against Russia from the European Union happen at any time, and Russia might or might not reciprocate. I mean, some of these agricultural sectors that Russia imported from Eastern Europe, they found alternatives, and they've made it very clear. Like I think Polish apples, which are very good, by the way. I lived there for many years. They're actually quite good, but they're not going to make it into the Russian market because Russia has alternatives to it. See, that's the price you pay by not thinking things out. I cannot see this in this McCarthyite environment that crosses both major political parties in the United States, which any political figure or party that can say, hey, why don't we lift those sanctions on Russia? It isn't going to happen. Look, Jackson Vanik was on Russia. I mean, that was introduced during the Soviet era on the issue of Jewish immigration out of the Soviet Union. But it stayed on for a decade and a half after the Soviet Union. It was still there, and it was an impediment for Russia to get into the World Trade Organization. So I don't see that there's any appetite for any politician in standing to say we should reconsider that. I think they could be there forever. And you know what? Who's going to be the loser? The United States is going to be the loser.
Alexander, you want to say something?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I think the sanctions affect the Russian economy quite a lot.
Oh yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I agree. But the question was, who does it hurt most? And I would say,
I mean, now with every year that passes, almost with every month that passes, the balance shifts. So Russia is actually now being strengthened by the sanctions in some ways. And it is the Europeans especially who are being weakened by the sanctions. But to come back to a point that Peter made, even if the Europeans were to lift sanctions, I don't think it would make that much difference, because I think that European companies that wanted to deal with Russia or with Russian companies which are sanctioned would be very, very nervous about doing so, given these very severe US sanctions that have been imposed. And I entirely agree with Peter. I'm afraid I don't think there's any prospect of those sanctions being lifted in any foreseeable future.
All right, guys.
And the punishment, I think I'm glad that Alexander Mercouris tempered my words, because he's absolutely correct. I mean, the cost of increasing capital has hurt Russian companies, no doubt about it. Okay, going to Western financial markets has made it's prohibitively expensive. They're discriminated against. But the upside of that is that Russia has a lot of ways to fund things internally, and this is what Putin has said ever since 2008. And I don't like to use the term oligarchs, but to the world of big business, don't get yourself addicted on cheap, corrupt, toxic Western money, because it's in another bubble right now, and it's going to burst again. And And Russia doesn't want to have to. The government here doesn't want to have to be put in the position where they have to bail out poor decision making on part of its business elite. So, virtue and necessity come together on this one here. Russian companies are far less leveraged in Western financial circles than they were in 2008, because Russia got burned big time in 2008 for believing in the well-working mechanisms of Western capital, okay, and so they haven't repeated that. So the financial crisis of 2008 and then the sanctions since 2014 have actually given Russia a roadmap of what to do and what not to do.
All right, we're past the hour, 12 minutes past the hour, guys. Smash that like button, share the channel. Let's get more people onto the Duran. The Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. You can buy a really, really nice t-shirt. TheDuranShop.com, and you can donate to us on PayPal and Patreon as well. And don't forget to follow us on iTunes and SoundCloud. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in on Live Chat 25. Alexander, what do you make, a question from Catherine, what do you make of the Russian Supreme Court classifying Jehovah's Witnesses as an extremist group?
Well, I think it is wrong, and I think Vladimir Putin also thinks it is wrong. He has spoken out against it, and I think that was a mistake, and I can understand why an organization like the Jehovah Witnesses might appear strange to some people in Russia, but I certainly don't think that going all that way to call it an extremist group was at all good or wise, and I hope that at some point it will be challenged in the Constitutional Court and found to be unconstitutional as being contrary to the discriminatory policy, anti-discriminatory provisions of the Russian Constitution. That is my own personal view. I think Vladimir Putin has made very clear that he shares it.
Right. Peter, from Liam, do you believe that Boko Haram was in some way created by the Atlanticist deep state?
Which book?
Boko Haram. Boko Haram. No.
Boko Haram. Oh, geez. Look, I mean, we do know. Okay, I can't answer the question directly, but we do look at the Mujahideen of Afghanistan when Russia had its forces there. I mean, we know that these groups were backing fanatical Islam, these jihadists, was part of the Western playbook. If you want to know more about this, there's a gentleman named Alistair Crook, which I hope I'll be interviewing again. I think he's a really good thinker, particularly on the Middle East. And he knows the entire history of this, and maybe we could ask him to come on to be part of one of our chats, because I think it would be quite fascinating. And I think he would say yes. There has certainly been a long history and pattern of Western intelligence services promoting these radical terrorist groups for their short-term purpose. The thing is that once you fire these people up, you can't get rid of them, okay? And then they feel betrayed, and then they will turn on you. So if we go through all of these all through North Africa, into the Middle East, specifically all the way to Afghanistan, yeah, there's a long road record of promoting these people to serve short-term political interests. And it is one of the most future historians, if there is going to be any future, they will say how short-sighted and actually immoral it has been to support these kinds of groups. And like I said, it's for short-term gains, and they don't care because they pack up and leave, okay? But they leave behind broken societies.
All right. Alexander, and then Peter, I'd like to hear your take on this. This is for both of you from Happy Cat. We would like to understand the effects of the countries closest to Russia with the INF treaty that has now been pretty much killed. So what is the real danger of the INF treaty to Europe and the countries closest to Russia? Is there really a danger, or is this just hyperbole?
I think it depends very much on what the Europeans do. If the Europeans stand their ground and make it very clear that they're not going to allow the United States to start installing medium-range weapons that can target Russia from Europe, then I think the Russians have made it very clear that they will not deploy those counter missiles either. They will develop them because, of course, they've got to be ready for the possibility that these weapons might be deployed. But if they're not actually deployed, I think the Russians will not counter them. I'm afraid I am not confident that the Europeans will stand their ground, even though some countries in Europe, like Germany, have said that they oppose this policy. And I'm also afraid that the United States, though at the present moment in time, it is saying that it has no plans to deploy medium-range weapons in Europe, will at some point choose to do so. If it didn't intend to do so, I don't see why it needed to pull out of the INF treaty with Russia. So I think we will probably see at some point, I think there's a risk we will see deployments happening. If that happens, Europe becomes once again a nuclear battleground. And at that point also, I think that it becomes more and more difficult for the other great treaty limiting nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia. That is the START treaty, the New START treaty, to survive. And we could very well find ourselves in an uncontrolled arms race. It's a bleak picture, but I'm afraid that is the likeliest way forward. But it does depend upon what the Europeans do. There is the other dimension to this, which is what the United States does in Asia. If the United States presses ahead and starts deploying medium-range nuclear weapons in Japan and South Korea to target China, then it will have a nuclear arms race in the Pacific against China, which has greater industrial resources nowadays than the United States, on top of the naval arms race that is also happening in that part of the world. I don't see how any of that is to the US advantage, but it is, as I said, for the Europeans and for the US in Asia to decide what's going to happen next.
Peter, what do you think of the INF treaty? Is it a real danger for Europe?
Absolutely. This is. I'm trying to find my cufflinks. I bought some cufflinks. It's a 3 minutes to 12, and that's why I bought them, because I was thinking of the atomic scientists in their clock, looking at the minutes before catastrophe. Look, Russia is going to act. Okay, with the withdrawal of the United States, Russia is going to mirror that as well. Having said that, Russia is going to actually act as if it's still in place. Because of what Alexander Mercouris just said. I mean, if the U.S. wants to take the first move in deploying these type of weaponry, then Russia will be prepared. And I want to make it very clear to everyone here: where is the evidence that Russia is not in compliance of the INF? You see it all the time. No evidence has ever been produced. Just because you make a claim doesn't make it true. And so, and we also know John Bolton has for decades been against the INF in any arms control agreement. So, you know, that's, again, show me the facts. Not, you know, you have a right to your opinion, but you don't have a right to the facts, okay? And so I find this to be a complete whitewash, all right? I think Russia is acting responsibly, and I know that let's say the decision makers in Europe know this. For the first time since 1987, now they're a nuclear target again. How'd that happen? That's what they're saying. And the United States is again compromising their sovereignty and their security. And we're going to see how the Europeans.
All right, Alexander.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Alexander, and then Peter, if you can also give me a couple of countries. Really quick, simple question, but it's a good super chat. Is there anyone in the EU who wants to lift sanctions against Russia? What countries? Real quick,
I think quite a lot of countries.
Give us some names.
Right.
Austria.
Yeah, Italy's made it quite clear that it doesn't agree with the sanctions. Austria, as Peter says, Hungary has said that it doesn't agree with them. The Czech Republic, Slovakia, I think the Slovenia, Croatia, there's quite a significant Bulgaria. There's quite a significant block now. The point is that none of these countries have had the courage so far. I'm sure Cyprus probably would vote for them, though I don't know that. I think that relations between Russia and Cyprus have cooled a little. But I don't think the problem has been that those countries up to now have not really put their act together, have not been prepared to take on the German French combine, which has, generally run the EU. And I think that there would be, they've been looking for a leader, and they might have found it in Italy. But I come back to what I said. We should not hope too much for any radical change if the sanctions are lifted now. If they'd been lifted a few years ago, it would have made a very big difference. Now, the Europeans have missed the bus. The Russian economy has evolved beyond the point where it needs to trade with the EU in the same way, and they won't be taking in EU food imports in the way that they did previously. And it's difficult to see, for me, how EU companies, as I said, are going to want to deal with Russian sanctioned companies, Russian companies, which have been sanctioned by the US. I mean, it isn't going to happen. The EU should have taken its stand years ago, but it passed up the opportunity to do so, and it's now going to pay the price.
Peter, let's take a look at those cufflinks. If you can speak on, let's see them, Peter.
Yeah, right now, see, that's it's like 3 minutes to 12. All right. Oh, actually, a side story. I recently acquired these. Last Friday, I was invited to the Kremlin, and the deputy press person for the presidential office, Mr. Gromov, you can see actually behind me. There we go. See right there. I got an award, and it was for Russian television journalists, and I'm really quite proud. There was all the big names in Russian television was there, and I was very pleased to say that when I got my award, I got a lot of people stood up and clapped. I mean, I don't really watch them very much, but apparently they watch me, so I was very, very proud. It was a wonderful moment. Saw some really great people, and really truly professional, and it was a delight to be there. So it was about 200 people. It was a gala event. It was all day. Looked pretty sharp, and I had my cufflinks on.
All right, congratulations, Peter. That's great news. Great news. Congratulations, Peter Lavelle. MZ, thank you for your super chat. And Peter, while you're talking about Russia, what are Russia's a super chat from Rainy Steps? What are Russia's view on cryptocurrency? There were rumors that Russia was going to move very aggressively in the cryptocurrency space, but I think they've cooled it down since then.
Well, they're very suspicious. Okay, I mean, I'm not saying that this is one possible future, but if you've looked at crypto for the last couple of years, I mean, that's a roller coaster ride. Whoa, big time. Okay, unfortunately, there's still scams involved in it. It's the transparency, but people always say, but it's very technology is transparency. Well, ask the investors that lost all their money. Okay, I think that is a one possible future, and we have said on this program so many times, the financial system here is so rigidly conservative. They see something like that and they say, we're not. Not only would it be competition, of course you don't want, but would it destabilize the regular banking system? And that's what they want to look at here. So they're very tepid towards it. Okay, they don't stop individuals from participating in it. Okay, but they're certainly not promoting it, not yet.
All right, thank you, Andre C, for your super chat as well. Really appreciate it. Alexander, super chat from Enrico. Pro-Russia parties could win elections in Moldova. Atlantic Council is preparing a destabilization campaign. Another front in the anti-Russia crusade? It's a question mark. Another front in the anti-Russia crusade.
The situation in Moldova is very bad. And can I just go back a couple of years? Because of course what happened was that back in 2009, there was what was effectively a color revolution in Moldova, where an election result which brought the Moldovan Communist Party which is, by the way, not a pro-Russian party to power, was overturned. Ever since then, a pro-Western, pro-EU liberal grouping has basically governed Moldova. There were presidential elections a few years ago when the Moldovan Socialist Party, which is pro-Russian, its leader, Igor Dodon, won those elections, but has found it very, very difficult to pursue any kind of political line because the pro-EU parties control the parliament. There were parliamentary elections in Moldova a few years ago. The Socialist Party appeared to win those, and yet what eventually happened was that the pro-EU parties that had seemed to lose very badly were able to persuade, and I use the word persuade, shall we say, with typical English understatement, managed to persuade various MPs who had previously been voted on other tickets to join them, and as a result reconstituted their majority and have been systematically using that majority to undermine the position of the president. Now, none of this has been reported in the West. As you correctly say, the Western governments, and we shouldn't just talk about the Atlantic Council, but the EU, the United States, they have a very big interest in Moldova. They wanted to continue on this pro-EU line. I think that there is a strong possibility that the Socialist Party could win, but I recently saw a report on Interfax, it was only one line long, which said that the leadership of the Socialist Party, which might win the election, and which is Moldova's biggest party, fears that it could be banned from participating in the elections at all. So we have, I'm sorry to say this, a possible Maidan-style Ukrainian scenario being played out in Moldova quite easily, with a systematic attempt to try to keep this country on its pro-EU path, irrespective of what elections decide. And we will just have to keep an eye on what goes on there, and be very concerned about its future stability.
You know, what this reminds me of is it's the Comintern in the 1920s and 30s, okay? You know, the Soviets, you know, they had they had the communist parties all through Europe, and they were supposed to all adopt the same line, the party line, follow Moscow's line, you know, and it's the same thing. This is the neoliberal Comintern, okay? Irrespective of you fiddle with the election laws, you fiddle with the parties, you fiddle with parliament, you fiddle until you get the answer you want, okay? But it doesn't engender legitimacy, okay? And at the end of the day, that's what counts. Ask the yellow vests, okay? Because France has a very long history of they invented democracy for the world, okay? And look what the elites did. They fiddled with it in every single possible way. And then what they got is the yellow vest. And the yellow vest is going to be the story of this year. Watch. I talked to Xavier Moreau, was on my program yesterday, on air today. It's just on YouTube. And he told me on camera and off camera, this is just the beginning, okay? And very nuanced. Watch it.
Wow. All right, Peter, from Penguins fan, when it comes to the Arctic, who owns the most water, oil, and gas?
You know, I see these articles, and a lot of it's just fake news, all right? The 1959 law on Antarctica is very, very clear. No one can take sovereign claims, okay? Now, as far as use of the water, fisheries, and all of that, it's really remarkable how so many people push this competition in Antarctica. You know what? Antarctica is probably the sole place, the only place in the world where there is so much cooperation. I have a number of friends, Russian and American, that have gone down to Antarctica. And the way every single country that is there, the way they cooperate is remarkable and truly respectful. Now, what does China and Russia want? Because everybody thinks that's aggression here. No, what they need is to be able to set up satellite positions for their GPS, okay? That's what they want to do. And they're doing it transparently. Everybody knows what they're doing here. Because when it comes to Antarctica, you have to be transparent. That's the rule. And it's remarkable, a place where there is so much cooperation, it gets spun as some kind of menacing outside powers. Actually, if you look at the reaction to Antarctica policy vis-a-vis Australia, a lot of Australians are worried that, by trying to tip how things are done in Antarctica, because it looks like something the Australians might be thinking about doing that it will destabilize where a place where that is very, very stable. You can't militarize it, okay? You can't have any kind of energy, any kind of real footprint, okay? I mean, something extremely tiny. And one thing that is absolutely a religious tenet: you cannot leave anything behind. When you have a research expedition, everything you bring, everything you take out with you, including the garbage. It is pristine, and it will not be damaged by any kind of research. And even something like with telecommunications, we're going to have to all agree, is this going to be hurting the environment? Yes or no? And it will be done in cooperation, not in competition. I read these articles, it's fake news.
And what about the Arctic, Peter, where there is a lot of activity, a lot of competition?
Well, that's a totally different thing, because that's not land, okay? It's just the geographical space, all right? A few months ago, the U.S. canceled an icebreaker going across the North Pole because they were afraid it would break down and they'd have to ask the Russians to help them, okay? Russia has been looking at the Arctic a lot, okay, obviously. And I have to refresh my memory, but there's ongoing disputes because of continental shelves. Who controls what? And it hasn't, Alexander, you may know better than I do. I don't think there's been any real resolution. Canada has a claim, Russia has a claim, Iceland has a claim, but then through Denmark, and the Chinese, interestingly enough, are trying to get involved with Russian adventures, so they can somehow, in some way, legally get involved there. The Chinese want to be there because that will be a trading route. Once the ice cap not melts, but turns into slush, where you can actually go through it relatively easy. So there's a lot of competition there, and the country that is ahead is Russia by far. The Canadians had this epiphany. Oh my God, we don't have enough icebreakers. They're building them right now. Okay, Russia has been looking at it because Russia's oil companies, particularly Lukoil, has a lot of investment in the Arctic Circle, and it is taking resources out of the ground. And of course, the Russian state is very supportive of it because they'll get tax revenues. So the Russians are very keen on it, and because they're ahead, they're doing well. The Americans and the Canadians are saying we have to catch up. Okay, so it's a very long-term thing, but there's a lot of energy resources there. Okay, don't tell Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because she'll be against it. Okay.
Yeah, that's for sure. That was a good one.
I feel that
was a good one.
That's my topic for tomorrow's crosstalk. Okay.
All right, that was a good one. All right, to both of you, Peter and Alexander. This one's an interesting one. So Alexander, I'll throw it to you, and then Peter, you can also comment on this. It's a super chat from Brody. What do you guys know about Alexander Dugan, Vladimir Posner, and Vladimir Zhirinovsky? If you can give some background about these guys as well.
Yeah, right. Let's start with Alexander Dugan. I mean, he is a intellectual. He's been an academic in Russia. He has some very, very complicated views on all kinds of things, and he's become associated with Eurasianism, which is a tradition, an intellectual tradition with a long history in Russia, which considers that Russia has a distinct civilization and that it should be allowed to develop within its own sphere, and that Russia is somehow distinct from the West. He's also very, very, very critical of Western liberalism. Like an awful lot of intellectuals, he also looks at other types of ideologies and ideas. He's studied communism, he studied liberalism, he studied fascism, he studied German National Socialism. He's analyzed them. He's talked about sometimes positive things which he says he finds in these ideologies. To my mind, this is very much the actions of an intellectual, but people always seem to construe that to mean that he is somehow himself a Nazi or a fascist. I don't really think that. But regardless of what I think, and I'm not in a position really to comment about his views, one thing I can absolutely say: he has no political influence in Russia of any significance whatsoever. I read about how he supposedly advises President Putin. He doesn't. I read about how the Russian General Staff is supposedly guided by his thought. It isn't. He is a professor who has certain views.
And a self-promoter.
And a self-promoter. Exactly. He has no traction in any part of the Russian political system. And yes, he appears on television from time to time and goes on talk shows. I don't think anybody should take him very seriously. Vladimir Zhirinovsky is a genuine political leader in Russia. He had, in my opinion, a significant role to play in the 1990s. He has no connection, by the way. He has no real connection to Dugan. I know that sometimes they're conflated, but he doesn't. He basically embodies a more nationalist version of Russian politics. He is not, by any stretch of the imagination, in a major contender for power in Russia. He does have a following in Russia. He does have a representation in the Duma. He is now getting quite old, and in my opinion, his peak period of influence was in the 1990s and has passed away long ago. Vladimir Posner.
Let me just say here, he heads what's called the Russian Liberal Democratic Party. It's neither liberal or democratic. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, he's also, it should be said, something of a clown. I
was going to say that he's a pretty eccentric guy.
He's got some real zingers out there. Okay, he's an entertainer.
Which is, I think, I was going to say, I think people rather like that, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, he keeps the political system funny. And I think that, you know, sometimes people lack what I would call much of a sense of humor, and they take some of the things he says, which are really zany, altogether too seriously. Vladimir Posner is someone more in Peter's world than mine. I remember him very well.
Me too.
From Soviet times, when he was a regular person on expressing the Soviet point of view in the United States, and was very much an apologist in those days for the Soviet political system. I am not so familiar with him today, simply because, as I said, I don't live in Russia. I get the impression that he is quite an influential talk show host and journalist in Russia from what I would call an intelligent liberal perspective. In other words, he has broadly liberal views, but he expresses them with a great deal more intelligence and understanding of Russian realities than some Russian liberals do. I can't say very much more about him than that.
Peter, would you like to comment on those?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, I'll just on the last one.
Posner.
Yeah. Well, Posner, he's a real fixture here. He's kind of the patron saint of television commentary. He is a very reasonable person. He's very reasonable. He's a reasonable liberal, but he makes it very clear that he has preferences. He speaks fluent French as well, so he knows France and the United States very well. The Phil Donahue Show, where he co-hosted with Phil Donahue a series of programs, very slick. I suppose women would find him attractive for his age, but he's getting on. But I've interviewed him myself, and he is constantly comparing Russia to what he knows of the West, and that is the France and the United States. And I remember asking him, but is that really fair? Is that like apples and oranges? And he kind of chuckled, said, yeah, that's kind of true. And so, I mean, he doesn't push he's not a fanatic. He's not an ideologue. Okay, he's certainly a liberal. All right. If you read closely, he's been very critical how the U.S. Describes Russia, characterizes Russia. So he does push back a little bit.
All right. Vegan for the planet. Duran deserves more subscribers. Share. Yes.
Mhm.
Very good point. Vegan for the planet. Guys,
Buy a
share.
t-shirt. Buy a t-shirt.
Buy a t-shirt. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notifications bell. Alexander from Kirstein. What do you think? Who will win the EU elections? The globalists, i.e. Merkel and Macron, or the conservatives, i.e. Orban, Salvini, Visegrad?
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see. But at the moment, the momentum clearly is with the latter. I mean, they seem to be making the ground. What I would say is, if you look at the EU Parliament, the sort of what you call the globalists, I would agree with that, by the way, description. They have what has been almost a built-in majority, and it will take a very big political earthquake to overturn that entirely. So I think we will certainly see a shift away from them in the EU elections, but let's not get our hopes raised too high. We'll just have to see.
Because the interesting thing is here is that it's asymmetrical, because the globalists will walk in lockstep. But when you have these other populist movements, remember, a populist movement is not necessarily ideological, but it's a political process, okay? Because populism in Greece or Italy or Austria or Poland or Hungary can mean very different things, okay? But they have one thing in common, is they're against the globalists, but they don't have a coherent manifesto that all of them are reading from the same hymn sheet. That's the difference between the two, all right? And that's what makes it difficult for their inroads. I say they take the long course. They don't see. This is what I worry about the yellow vests, because everybody, who's the leader? Maybe they're going to have an organization. They don't need to do that yet. Don't do it. You'll be compromised and corrupted. Okay. So what I say to these populist groups, hang in there. On many points, I think you're going to get strong support, and you're going to have to do it step by step. But don't have this ideologically driven block. That our block fights your block. You'll lose, because they have the administrative resources. Okay, if they don't like elections, they say, let's try again. Okay, you don't have that luxury. So it's a long march, okay, because this neoliberalism, it is so toxic, it's gone so deep into the body politic. It's going to take a long time. It's like an exorcism. It's going to take a while. Don't expect a miracle cure in one election.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time. Penguins fan Peter, why is Russia keeping their money in the West? I say take it out. Why is Russia keeping their money?
I say the same thing. I say the same thing. Well, what was it a few weeks ago or months ago? The UK government wants to start looking at the financial transactions of some of these Russians here. I'm for it. Go ahead. I'd like to know about it too. Okay, how'd you get the money out? Okay, where'd you get the money from? Why don't you bring it back to Russia where it belongs? Okay, that's where you made it. All right. So, yeah, I mean, this has been a very big problem. These people, the number of people that leave with tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, and they say, I'm a political refugee. Oh yeah, right. And then the goofballs in government in the UK believe them. Okay, that's how you get the UK is turned into God's playground. Linfenlenko, the Skripals, all this other stuff going on in Britain. They used Britain as a playground. Okay, they should have vetted these people a long time ago. Now, what was the guy that ran Bank Moskva? That was like the third bank in Russia. The guy took the money and ran off to the UK. I'm a refugee. Gullible, stupid political elite in the UK just gobbled it up. Oh, I guess I know why. Because that money now is in British banks and they're using it. Okay, pure hypocrisy.
Yes.
Alexander, you want to chime in on that?
I mean, if we're talking about the Russian government, they have been steadily taking their money out of the West. and consolidating it in Russia. I mean, they've been dumping U.S. Treasury bonds. They've been piling up gold in their reserves, and they've now set up depositories in Russia where the gold is now kept in Russia. They've been buying Chinese currency, Chinese yuan. So they are steadily reducing their holdings in the West to the extent that they exist at all. Russian businessmen and individuals are another issue, because of course a lot of these people, let's be straightforward about this, have bad consciences about how they made their money, or they have other reasons why they don't trust the Russian authorities. And historically, and it's not surprising if you look at Russian history, they wanted to keep a lot of their money abroad as a hedge against any bad things being done to them in Russia. I think the calculus is now changing. We were asked questions earlier on this program about how sanctions are helping Russia. Here's an example, because by going after Russian businessmen increasingly in the West, as the West has been doing with attacks on people like Deripaska and all the rest, the story is that more and more of them are now starting to move their money back into Russia. One way they're doing it, apparently, is by buying Russian euro bonds, so that they're able to convert their dollars into Russian euro bonds, whilst at the same time not taking out rubles. So there is a trend, and I think we will see that accelerate.
Alexander from MG, what's the prospect of BRICS in light of the new Brazilian president, Bolsonaro?
Well, I've always
good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Now, I've always discussed the BRICS, and I've always said that, in my opinion, you have to understand that the BRICS operates at two levels. There is China and Russia, which are more than just partners. I mean, you're already seeing more and more articles now, which is basically admitting that these are two countries which are de facto allies. And what the Chinese and the Russians did in order to, if you like, conceal their strategic partnership, which is the expression they like to use when they describe their relationship, they have weaved around themselves various other organizations, of which the BRICS is one. I think the BRICS has always been a great deal more than just a talking shop, but it is not fundamental to the underlying but part of what is becoming a bipolar international system, which is this strategic partnership that the Russians and the Chinese have with each other. Brazil will become increasingly detached from the BRICS. I have no doubt about this. Bolsonaro is very pro-American. I think that India, by contrast, after a time when it appeared to be flirting with the US and seemed to be trying to distance itself a little from China, is now swinging back more towards the BRICS.
Or at least the equilibrium.
Exactly. But I mean, it will always maintain a kind of equilibrium. I think South Africa, which we talked about earlier, is just too small to be a significant player. So I think that Chinese-Russian strategic partnership will continue. I think the BRICS will continue in a nominal form, but with Brazil increasingly detaching itself from it. And I think we'll see the Indians continuing to play this very intelligent game they've been playing for many years now, sometimes tilting more to the US, sometimes tilting more to the Chinese and the Russians, always careful to keep their bridges open to both.
Yeah, I'm sad to say it, but I think with the election result in Brazil, that BRICS, for the most part, in light of what Alexander Mercouris just said there, it's going to go into a state of stasis. I don't really think it has a whole lot of direction right now, unfortunately. But see, countries like South Africa specifically, and I think Brazil before the election, they wanted to see the BRICS mirror the G7, and and that's something China and Russia they just won't do it. They just won't. And India, considering its experience with colonialization, after I mean, India is a power of the future. I mean, and like we've said before, they have one of the most important things to become a great power: intellectual power. They got the stuff between the ears, okay, and that would be compromising their sovereignty. I was in Beijing 2 summers ago, and I got a cool reception from a lot of BRICS supporters, because I said, Russia doesn't want to mirror the G7, okay? Not at all. We should work together on what we find in common, okay? Like having an alternative media sphere, an alternative internet, alternative banking and infrastructure programs. That's where I think is meaningful. The rest of it's kind of nice. It's nice to hear, nice to talk about, nice to go to these media forums where it's all glossy and expensive. But at the end of the day, it's talk, okay? And BRICS needs to do stuff, okay? Real stuff.
Yes, can I just quickly say, I think Peter's absolutely right. Some of these countries, India and South Africa, I think still think too much in terms of the Cold War.
Yeah.
When the Soviet Union did try and create not just alternative institutions, but rival institutions, and that they thought, when the Indians and the South Africans and those other people thought that this was what the BRICS was going to be all about. It isn't. The Russians and the Chinese do not have that kind of strategy behind them. They are about looking after themselves first and foremost. They're not really about mirroring what the United States has been trying to do. And I think that is a very important distinction which Peter has made.
Well, what Russia and China want to do vis-a-vis the BRICS and their strategic partnership is they want to weather the end of the American unipolar moment. That's what they want to do. They want to weather that. That's top of mind, okay?
Yes.
And we're in choppy waters, folks, and it's going to get more choppy, because as that the polar unipolar moment is over. It's just that the political class doesn't accept it in the West, okay? They don't.
No.
And that's why we get all of this turbulence. That's why there are people talking about going to war with Iran. That's why they're talking about military incursion into Venezuela. Venezuela is a crown jewel to get, okay?
Yes.
See, they're thinking in terms of the old paradigm. And that's why this world is so dangerous right now.
Yes.
Afterglow, what happened to my super chat? Afterglow, I apologize if I didn't see that super chat. I apologize, but send me that question in the chat and I'll get to it. We'll get to that question. So I might have missed it. A lot of super chats, a lot of questions.
In about 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes.
And then we'll wind it down, but get me that question and we'll answer it. Peter, another super chat from Andrew. What do you think of AOC's Green New Deal?
I actually have a lot of
You can chime in as well, Alexander, from the UK. What you think?
I'll blow through for the next 10. This is turning into my Brexit, okay? It's well intended. It was nicely delivered. It feels good. Oh, everybody likes trees, clean air. It's extremely impractical. It's probably the greatest form of virtual signaling that we're going to see in the next during this election cycle. It's impractical. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about doing things about the environment. I absolutely agree. Even Republicans, the majority of Republicans have come to that conclusion. So it isn't as if this idea isn't something that is completely alien. It's the way they want to do it, okay? And that's where me as a conservative and my friends that are progressives, this is where we differ. I like some of their goals, how they want to get there, and say this is silly and nonsense. It'll never work, and you'll never be able to pay for it. This is being done for a reason. This is all about the 2020 election, and what they're drawing the battle lines here. I mean, Donald Trump loves AOC. She is his favorite politician right now, because she has created the juxtaposition that he wants, because he knows this. And I'm not pouring cold water on her. Okay, not at all. But she's the wedge to break up the Democratic Party, because Nancy Pelosi, and the establishment, they can't go along with this. They simply will not. And so it's interesting to me how the Republicans watch Fox News. I mean, it should be AOC network news. They love talking about her. They love to mock her, and they love to make fun of her. They like to fact check her. And then you have the MSNBCs and CNN. They're doing the same thing, but in a different way, trying to corral her, it's good to have you in Congress, but maybe sit over here next to them, okay, and wait your turn. So she's turning into the pivot right now. It's early days, but Kamala Harris, I think Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they're being forced by this AOC is a power of nature to go along with her. And that's exactly what the Republicans want to happen, okay? Because in the heartland, they're going to say, look, what do you want? Yellow vest? You want us all to wear yellow vests? You want us to pay for it? That's what you're saying? You want us to pay for it? You got to be kidding. And it's essentially the plan, this new Green New Deal, this is essentially saying the middle class, you have to give up what you need to get by. Well, but do you still think that who of these billionaires? So they're going to walk to Davos? They're going to do the Nancy Pelosi. They're going to fly their personal jets. Well, people that need their truck to get to work have to drive 3 hours to get to work. They're not going to be allowed to use their truck. You've got to be out of your mind.
Well, can I just add to what Peter just said, that of course the Yellow Vests protests in France began because were provoked by increases in price of diesel oil, done supposedly for ecological and green reasons. So it seems to me that Ocasio-Cortez is not looking at the situation in France. And I think this isn't going to play in America. All I'm going to say about her, I mean, Peter knows much more about this than me, and I think he said all the right things for me. I understand what he's saying. But she seems to me someone who's come very far, very fast, far too fast. And I don't think she really has much understanding of practical economics. I mean, as I understand it, she's also bought heavily into this new monetarism idea, which seems to me a completely crazy idea. The idea that you can pay for all of these things by what looks to me suspiciously like printing money.
Well, she's not going to have to worry about it. She got a $10 million deal with Netflix, okay? Hey, AOC, are you going to give up 90% of that in taxes? You go first. You be an example, okay? Why don't you give it all to the government, okay? Because that's what you want. You want everyone's money, all of it, to go to the government, and everyone will have a job. Everyone will have an education. And this is this utopia.
Utopia. It's utopia. Exactly.
It's dystopia, because it'll turn into tyranny. Always turns into tyranny.
Yeah.
All right. Alexander from Andre C. The question of Boko Haram brings us to the effective U.S. policy of hybrid warfare in Venezuela, Ukraine, etc. Apart from killing the dollar, what can Russia do to protect itself?
Well, what Russia can do is the kind of things it has been doing, which is essentially structure its economy to be as macroeconomically stable as possible. And that's exactly what it's done, and that's what it's in an almost unique position to do. Because where there is economic stability and people feel that, if they turn up to work, there'll be a job for them and there'll be a pay packet in their bank, that kind of hybrid war doesn't have much traction. Now, that is what the Russians can do in Russia. If you're talking about what they can do globally, their power is not global.
Very limited.
So exactly. So I mean, you can't expect them to right problems in places like Nigeria, where there's problems with Boko Haram, to the extent that there is a manifestation of hybrid war policies. I mean, I think that the Russians actually, by withstanding these kinds of attacks, are doing quite a lot already. I mean, they do provide, if you like, the power of example, and I think that isn't something we should underestimate.
Peter, a super chat from Brody. Does Russia, like Britain and America, support Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen? And in what ways does Russia support Saudi Arabia in Israel?
Well, certainly Russia isn't for this war in Yemen, and it's not involved in it whatsoever. Not at all. Does it support Israel? I don't understand what that question means. I mean,
in what ways does Saudi Arabia as well? Does Russia support Saudi Arabia and Israel?
Well,
What are the spheres?
Okay, Russia and Saudi Arabia are energy powers. Okay, Russia will deal with a sovereign country that has similar resources. I mean, Russia and Saudi Arabia, as a nominal head of OPEC, are working very, very closely in their national interest. Does that mean that Russia likes what happens inside of Saudi Arabia? Does it mean it likes its foreign policy towards Yemen? Not at all. I mean, they don't make the same kind of connections. And Riyadh is there. The House of Saud is there. And they have the power. They have the resources. Those are the people you deal with, okay? It's not talking about preferences. It's talking about realities, all right? The same kind of relationship Russia has with Israel. Israel's there. Okay, maybe you don't like Israel. Maybe you don't think it should be there, but it is there. It is a member of the United Nations, all right? And so it has state-to-state relationships with these countries. And Russia has been, and we've seen it time and again. I think the best example is with Putin and Erdogan. When they go in front of the public, they openly say, we disagree on this issue. We just disagree. We're openly saying to the public, we disagree on this issue. Okay, it's not, you know, my way or the highway. Okay, it's called nuance, folks. It's complicated. But what can Russia do to end Saudi Arabia's needless, horrific war on Yemen? Very little, actually. Very little.
Yeah, can I just say something about, because Peter is absolutely right, and I think I think a lot of these questions once again reflect Cold War experience. The idea being that, you know, the Soviet Union on the one hand had its allies and friends and its enemies, and that the United States and its on the other side did the same thing. Russian policy today is to have good relations with all countries. All countries. That means good relations with Saudi Arabia, as well as good relations with Iran. It means good relations with Israel, as well as good relations with Syria. It doesn't mean that the Russians have to agree with what the Saudis are doing in Yemen or what the Israelis are doing in Palestine. They may disagree profoundly with those things, but they will not take that disagreement to the point where it will jeopardize their good relations with those countries.
All right, let's wind it down now, guys. Peter, Andre, C would also like to know what's your thoughts on hybrid warfare, U.S. hybrid warfare, real quick.
Well, I mean, that's a huge, huge topic. It's obviously being applied against Venezuela right now, and we'll see how far it goes. I mean, it's what are the costs to the United States to go down this road? Because as we pointed out in the beginning of our conversation, while Venezuela is extremely vulnerable, does the United States want to pay the cost to get the political outcome it wants in Venezuela? Also, we have to, and we haven't even mentioned in this podcast, is that we know that it's been reports that the illegal upstart interim government president Guaido has made some kind of overtures to the Chinese, presumably to the Russians as well. I don't think the Russians or the Chinese have. He's a person of no standing. I mean, if he comes to power illegally, then why would he keep legal agreements with them? I mean, it's kind of logical, you know. So yeah, I mean, everything but the kitchen sink is being thrown at Venezuela right now. And we've stressed over and over again here and other podcasts, there are a lot of vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of knowns and a lot of known unknowns, if I can quote Rumsfeld.
Okay. All right, let's wind it down. 2 hours. 2 hours going. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, everybody who tuned in for this live chat number 25. Peter, what are you keeping your eye out for the week coming ahead?
Well, AOC, because I'm doing a program on it tomorrow. I love researching it. It's amazing. All right. Also, I'll be watching the Yellow Vests, because that story has legs. This is good. I'm right now here. We're beginning of February. It's just going to be the story of the year. I'm convinced of it, because the demonstration effect is going to be everywhere, and it's also going to be affected in the United States. I'm going to see how Donald Trump, forget the GOP, bunch of losers, see how he's going to deal with it.
A lot of great memes on AOC as well, Peter. So
Oh, yeah.
take a look at those memes. Alexander, what are you looking out for this week?
Lots of things are going on.
Brexit.
Well, Brexit.
We didn't talk that much about Brexit, but we've got some videos coming out on
Thank
that.
God.
Thank God. There's supposed to be a vote on Brexit, by the way, on one of Theresa May's, the latest iteration of Theresa May's deal, the one which has already been rejected multiple times. It's become a zombie. It just won't die.
No, you could put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
Well, there you go. It's supposed to be coming up for a vote this week. I suspect that's going to be postponed again. But anyway, I have to keep an eye on it. We'll see what happens. Other things are happening in the world. It's possible that we're in the last days of the ISIS caliphate. There's been a major offensive against it, what's left of it, about 4 kilometers apparently, in Syria. We'll see what happens. There is obviously Venezuela, always to keep an eye on. So there's things to look out for there. And I'm afraid the political situation in both France and the United States is very interesting. I mean, Peter's absolutely right about the yellow vests. We've discussed this issue many times on our programs. I agree. I too think this thing is nowhere near an end. I too think it's most likely going to grow. We shall see. And then, of course, in the United States, there's a fair chance that we're going to see another government shutdown looming very soon. And there's always the dramas of what's going to happen with anything else, that any other trick that Mueller might pull. We've had a story, a claim from the Justice Department, from Whitaker, who's the Deputy Attorney General, that Mueller's report is coming out imminently. I saw a few weeks ago a report that it was going to come out this February. We are now in February. There's no sign of it. We will see what happens.
And one last word here. I said, everyone, please chip into the Duran, because I'd like to buy a yellow vest, and I'd like to give it to Alexander Mercouris, and that I, with my power and authority and legitimacy, will make Alexander Mercouris the president of the French Republic. Okay, I think that this is something. I think this story has legs too. Okay.
There was a question earlier in the chat, real quick, Peter and Alexander. Do you support the yellow vests? That was a question, literally. Do you support the yellow vest movement?
I do.
I think so. I mean, I don't see what there is to oppose about it.
Agreed. Well said.
All right, guys. That's it. Live chat 25 is in the books. All right. Thank you, everybody who joined the chat. Thank you for everyone who sent us your super chats as well. Subscribe, share the channel, hit that like button. I hope everyone has a very, very good week, a remaining Sunday, wherever you are in the world, morning, afternoon, evening. Have a great Monday. Have a great week. Tune into the videos that we have coming up this week as well, and share those videos with everybody you know as well. Share them on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever you use. Gab, Minds, BitChute. Share us everywhere. We really, really appreciate the help. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you very much. Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London, in an undisclosed location. We don't know where you are, but it is the UK. People were saying, Alexander, that you were in France, actually. Are you in France?
No, I am not in France. I am in England. Okay. I love France. I would love to be there, but I'm not there. Sad to say.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.